As is pretty common with American politics, there's a lot of dishonesty coming from both sides because, in general, partisans in America, whether they're from the left or right, are not focused on truth, but more focused on winning. They want their side to win, they want their tribe to win. So, from these two very dishonest positions comes a lot of misinformation. So, this video is for people that would like to see the AR-15 banned. You've heard a lot of dishonest arguments coming from the right as to why that's a bad idea, but there's something that you might need to consider that you might be wrong about. For example, is the AR-15 really the problem? And before we talk about whether it's really the problem, do you even know what an AR-15 is? Now, overwhelmingly, the arguments that come from the right are misinformed and very, very dishonest. One of the tactics you'll see utilized is a deflection sort of red herring where they will poke fun at the lack of knowledge or understanding of guns by typical liberals. So rather than having an honest discussion about gun safety and what's the right approach, what can we do to, prevent a lot of these shootings from happening, they will be this sort of condescending, what's an assault rifle? Do you even know what an AR stands for? Right? And then there's arguments about that the issue is that the guns look scary, right? There's narratives about referring to an AR-15 as a weapon of war. What makes it a weapon of war? What makes it assault? Okay. I'm ex-military. I was trained on the real AR-15, and we'll get more into that a little bit later. I was trained on the M16 1A rifle. So let's start by debunking a lot of the nonsense that you hear coming from the right regarding gun control. So, first of all, AR stands for ArmaLite, right? But this talk about sort of scoffing about the assault rifle thing and weapons of war, the AR-15 is a weapon of war, right? In fact, the AR-15, if you go back to the history, comes from war, right? It was used by the military, right? So you have the AR-10, the AR-15, and then you have this other gun called the M16. 1516, AR-15, M16. Coincidence? Not at all. M16, manufactured by Colt, the AR-15, manufactured by ArmaLite. ArmaLite later sold the AR-15 designs to a company called Colt, who later created the M16. The original AR-15 created by ArmaLite was a weapon of war, designed for war. Dishonest actors would pretend as if, or try to distract with the fact that the original AR-15 that I'm referring to is a little bit different than the ones you would see today, because we're talking about way, way back in the past. We're talking about 1950s, 1960s, right? So there's been some changes between now and then. However, not as much as dishonest actors who are pro-gun would lead you to believe. ArmaLite was originally pushing the AR-10 and the AR-15 as weapons of war to the military. They designed many versions of these weapons with the intention of getting a military contract. Did not quite work out, no matter how hard they tried. But again, the intention was to create a weapon of literal war. That failed, so they ended up selling the design to Colt, who actually was able to successfully sell these guns to the military. The AR-15, I believe the Air Force was one of the first people to pick that up, and then the M16 later on. M16 versus AR-15. Every M16 is an AR-15, but not every AR-15 is an M16. That's a good way to identify the differences between the two. Now, some people will say that it's the M16 is full auto or full auto capable versus the AR-15 is not. That's actually not true. You can have AR-15s that are full auto, and there was also designs of the M16 that were semi-auto, not full auto. There are even ways, I believe, don't quote me on this, that you can modify an AR-15 to be full auto, but of course that's a modification. That's not the actual gun that you're purchasing in the store. But the fact that one is full auto and one is semi-auto, not necessarily a major distinction between the two. And essentially, another simplified way to look at the AR-15. And when they say AR-15, typically they're talking about an AR-15 style rifle, because AR meaning ArmaLite. So typically the rifle is not an ArmaLite rifle. It's just like one. So it's AR-15 like rifle, but it would actually be whatever the designation that the gun manufacturer gives it, right? But typically, I think another way to look at it is think of the AR-15 as or there's a lot of different versions, right? Think of the typical, when people are talking about an AR-15, typically what they're talking about is essentially the civilian version of an M16. The civilian version of an actual weapon of war, a military weapon. It's a civilian version of a military weapon, right? So don't let these dishonest actors fool you and distract you with this nonsensical talk about, oh, assault rifle, what makes it assault, and how is it a weapon of war? It's just a rifle and it looks scary. No. Anyone that truly knows guns will know that the AR-15 and M16 are obviously very, very closely related. And the idea of the differences that some people who don't know guns might have in terms of how different they are is not quite what they expect. Now, someone who's an absolute gun nut, which I am not, will completely disagree with me, because when you're on that level, every little nuance is a major deal, right? So they're going to go through a list of all these things. The AR-15 has this, and of course, you can't even really do that necessarily, because, again, the AR-15 is not just one thing. It's not just a particular, you go to the store and like, hey, I want to buy an AR-15, right? So even that is a challenging sort of statement to make in terms of how different they are. Because since there's so many different versions of these guns, in theory, you can find an AR-15 style weapon and a particular M16 that are actually extremely close in terms of capability. But again, we're getting into the weeds, right? Essentially, the AR-15 style weapons that we're typically talking about is a very, very effective weapon in terms of killing, right? Precision killing of human beings. Don't let that distract you, however, because they also make very good hunting weapons. One of the main reasons why they're so popular is because they are so reliable, so easy to use, and so modular. So you can build one from scratch or modify the one that you've purchased in a store. Why do so many people buy Hondas and Toyotas? For similar reasons. Gets the job done, economical compared to, for example, other weapons. Like if you were somehow allowed to buy an M16, it's going to cost you a bit more than an AR-15 style rifle. Another reason why AR-15 style rifles are very popular is because they're cool. At least that's how many people who buy them feel. They're a symbol. Which is why, for example, if I had an AR-15 style weapon, you'd never know about it, because I would truly purchase a weapon as a tool. And just like I don't show you my hammers and my drills and my other tools, I wouldn't show you my gun either. I wouldn't do videos with a bunch of guns in the background. I wouldn't brag about it and keep talking about, oh, man, do you like to... No. What does my gun have to do with anyone on YouTube, right? I'm not going to walk around with gun t-shirts and, gun stickers on my car. When you see people doing that level of showboating, then there's an element of, shall we say, ego involved, which is well beyond any AR-15 style weapon and what they were designed for. So for some people, it's just about image. For many, actually. I believe the capacity of the M16 and AR-15 is the same, if I'm not mistaken, 30 rounds in both cases. And again, it depends on which specific gun we're talking about. But generally speaking, you're looking at the same or similar capacity. If a mass shooter was going to do a shooting, and they had a choice between 25 bullets and an M16 versus 30 bullets and an AR-15, the 30 bullet AR-15 would be the better choice. So any differences between the AR-15 and M16 is not significant enough to make up for the less bullets, right? So giving an M16, oh, it's an M16, it's the same gun the military uses, but less bullets? No, the AR-15 would be the better choice. One of the significant, perhaps potential significant differences between the two would be that the M16 would be a longer range weapon. So if someone was looking to take out a target, beyond 300 meters, the M16 would be the better choice for the job due to the longer barrel length. But remember, the AR-15 is a very modular gun, so if you want to, you can simply construct an AR-15 with a 20-inch barrel, just like the original M16. So barrel length is not even something that you can really use to distinguish between an M16 and an AR-15. In fact, I don't think there's many things you can use to really distinguish the guns because, again, the AR-15, again, is so modular, right? So anything you get in the M16 that you don't get in the AR-15, potentially you can modify the AR-15 to match. Now, one of the key issues you run into by doing this, like let's say you want to create, you can't get an M16 for a reason, but that's what you really want. So you want to build an AR-15 that's like an M16. You could probably create something that can deliver a lot of what you get from the M16, because again, the guns fundamentally aren't that much different. But the main problem you'd run into is the legalities in terms of M16s being available in full auto and AR-15s, as far as I know, not being available in full auto, even though there were some models that were full auto back in the day. So again, the lines are very much blurred in terms of distinguishing between the gun. And a big reason is, again, we're not talking about one specific gun versus another specific gun. There's variations of the M16, there's variations of the AR-15, and the AR-15 in particular being problematic because of its modularity, meaning that it can be so customized to be so many different things, with the only restrictions being generally laws, whatever differences of laws wherever you are. Typically, for the scenarios that we see in terms of what was done, like what we saw in Texas, there really would not have been any significant advantage of having an M16. The rifles are practically the same in terms of the function, right? In terms of getting the job done, M16 versus AR-15, not really much of a difference. There are differences, of course, that you can get into depending on what you're looking to do in terms of, again, the modularity of the AR-15 can come in handy in terms of different attachments and things like that. There's also cost, $25,000, $30,000 for M16 if you're in a state that you can even get one, versus an AR-15 would be much, much, much cheaper than that. But again, functionally, the weapons are not really much different. So whenever someone tries to deceive you and talk about, oh, it's just a hunting rifle or something, and try to, scoff at the idea of calling it an assault weapon or calling it a weapon of war, know that this is someone who is perhaps taking advantage of your ignorance, trying to distract by making an argument that you don't know what you're talking about, because they don't want to have a substantive conversation about, how we can keep kids safe. They'd rather focus on your lingo, right? Again, we're pulling hairs, right? We've seen what the AR-15 style rifles are capable of doing in terms of the devastation, right? Those bullets just absolutely destroying a human being, right? It's a very, very effective killing weapon for killing, can be potentially utilized to kill a lot of people. But here is one thing that I think people who are talking about banning of AR-15s, what you're missing out on. Is it really? So we already discussed the AR-15 is definitely a very capable weapon, capable of a lot of destruction. However, that is not something that is really unique to AR-15 style weapons. So I want you to think about this for a second. For those of you guys that want to, we got to ban AR, if you're the one saying we got to ban an AR-15, rather than focusing on more general gun control measures, you want to hone in on the AR-15. You keep hearing about it, and maybe you focused on so many killings have happened, so these shootings, and the weapon of choice is the AR-15. So you're making a connection between the two. Clearly, there's something about this weapon. This is what you're thinking. Something about this weapon that these kind of killers are gravitating towards. It's delivering something that's making their jobs of slaughtering people easier or more practical. That's what you're thinking, right? Here's what you might be missing, right? And this is what happens from these polar conversations, right? One side is just, they're coming to take our guns. You don't want to hear anything about gun control. It's just, no. Oh, my cold, dead hands or whatever it is, right? And the other side is just like, oh, you guys are idiots. We need to just ban this stuff, ban it. Look at all these other countries and they have regulations. They don't have these shootings, right? Neither side wants to spend the time to actually investigate and understand what it is they're actually talking about. AR-15 style weapons are one of the most popular weapons out there. So when you try to target the AR-15 and you say that this is the gun they usually use, so you're making a connection, you're saying if this is the gun they're usually using for this kind of stuff, let's take away this gun so it won't be available for them to do this kind of stuff. But if it's one of the most popular guns, is the reason that they are killing people with this gun because the gun is the most capable of doing the job? Or is it because it's the most popular gun? Let me illustrate. Let's say that 95% of gun owners have 9mm pistols. I think the average mass shooting would be with a 9mm pistol. So would you want to ban the 9mm pistol because that's the gun of choice of mass shootings? If you actually care about gun control and you care about the kids that got killed, then maybe the logical thing to do would be to spend some time to actually understand why these things are happening and how they're happening. Because how can you ever be effective at resolving an issue that you don't even understand? Right? If you're just jumping on and saying, "Oh, they always use this gun," but why are they always using that gun? And there's a lot. This is information age. Information's out there. If you don't have the curiosity to learn about what is an AR-15, why do they keep using this gun, and thinking, "Wait a minute, why don't they use other guns?" Right? If these are questions that you've never even considered, I question how serious you are about gun control and gun safety and resolving this issue. Right? And the same thing goes for people who are anti-gun control. If you've been buying into this narrative of, "Oh, it's not an assault weapon, or it's not a weapon of war, it's just a rifle, and it's the AR-15, they're scared of it because of the label," or whatever, even though there might be some truth to that, right? But if you're caught up in a narrative and don't recognize that this essentially is a weapon of war, right? It is. That's where it came from war, from the military, right? And if you're not even aware of that, that tells me that you're just being fed a narrative, and you're just being a reactionary and just regurgitating what you heard, rather than spending the time to actually understand what you're talking about. Another example is anyone who is really serious about, you're really bothered by these shootings and you really want to see it stopped. Like it's a genuine thing. You're not just reacting, right? If that is true, and you don't even know where the guns typically come from, right? For example, you buy into a narrative of, if you ban guns, that means only criminals will have guns, right? And that's the thing. You have these sort of influencers that will come up with these, catchy phrases that sound good. It's kind of sophistry. Sounds good to you. And for people that don't know as much, don't necessarily have the capacity to form these kinds of arguments as some of these influencers, it sounds nice to you, and they're designed to appeal to your biases, and you just adopt it as your own, and then you go around repeating it. The best thing to take care of a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, right? It sounds logical, right? And you probably haven't spent much time thinking about, is it really logical? Does that really make sense? Like, for example, if you go around repeating this good guy with a gun narrative, but yet you're not even aware of what percentage of shootings are resolved by civilians with guns, right? Successfully resolved with civilians. If you don't even know the statistics, and I don't mean something you heard from some right-wing media channel. I mean, if you haven't actually looked it up yourself, like, what are the statistics? Like, someone says something, good guy with a gun sounds good, but is that really true? How often does that really happen? What are the statistics? If you've never looked it up, you're not a serious actor. You don't really care about the things you're talking about. You're just allowing somebody to feed you with a narrative, and you're just regurgitating it. And that's why when somebody challenges you, it falls apart, and you get into making attacks and insults, because they're not your arguments, so you can't defend them. These are arguments made to you by the media you consume, the influencers you follow. They give you these ideas. They give you these narratives, right? Typically, like, for example, let's look at the last shooting. This wasn't a criminal with a gun. This guy had no criminal record, right? You have law-abiding citizens who legally purchase guns and go and shoot up these schools, right? But if you listen to the narrative, you wouldn't think that that's what's happening. You'd think that it's these criminals, right? Criminals who don't follow the law. That's who's getting these guns. No, the gun in Texas was purchased legally by a good person with a gun. Obviously, by him shooting up those kids, that wasn't a good person. But as far as legally speaking, he was a good guy with a gun. Didn't have a criminal record, right? Didn't have a criminal record. That's a good guy with a gun who turned into a bad guy, all right? Obviously, I'm being a little bit facetious, but the point is that this was not a criminal who purchased a gun because he's a criminal. And I think you might be surprised how many times that is the case, that guns are purchased legally by people who are not criminals. So therefore, gun restrictions could have helped. For example, the shooter in Texas. Before he was old enough, he tried to get his sister to help him to get a gun, right? So the narrative of, oh, they'll just get a gun, illegally. Well, in this case, clearly not. He wanted to get this gun, so he probably would have done the shooting before he was 18. But because of restrictions, because of gun restrictions, he was unable to do so, right? So at least this was put off until he turned 18, and being in the pro-gun state that he's in, he was able to legally purchase a gun at that time, right? He didn't go get an illegal gun, right? For whatever reason, afraid to, doesn't know who to get it from. He's too young, whatever. I mean, the idea of a 17-year-old going out and trying to get an illegal gun, But again, it was the law that stopped him from being able to purchase a gun. Now, there's a loophole in the law, I guess, because he's trying to get his sister to buy it. So I think that's what people do. They get someone who is old enough, and they buy it for them, and that's how they get it. But again, what's the path for this guy to kill all these kids to get a gun? The law. His path to get the gun was all within the confines of the law, right? This mass shooting wasn't done by a drug dealer, some, whatever criminal guy that's been robbing banks or whatever. It was a kid with no record that waited until the law said he could purchase not only a gun, but a weapon of war, right? Even if typically it's not used for war, that's where the history comes from. He was able to purchase not one, but two, and tons of ammo, right? Because the law allowed him to. Change the law, let's say it's 25, he would most likely have to wait until 25. Maybe by then he resolves whatever issues he has and doesn't end up doing this. I mean, the idea of sitting for 5 years waiting until your 25th birthday to go and do something like this, I think it's a lot less likely with time and maturity. I mean, his brain, adults, their brains don't mature until like 25, 26, 27, something like that. So it's not even fully matured yet, right? So a lot can happen between his 18th birthday and his 25th birthday. I think the odds that the shooting would have happened if he had this age restriction of 25, I think are fairly low, right? No guarantee, but I think it's fairly low. And again, he was trying to purchase the gun before he was 18, but the law stopped him from doing so. And then when he turned 18, the law allowed him to do so. End result, all those kids got killed, right? But again, if you are against gun restrictions and you don't even know where the typical gun in Chicago comes from, where do they buy them, right? If you don't know where the typical gun that is used for all the murders, let's forget about mass shootings, just in general, all the murders. If you don't know where these guns are coming from, I can't take you very seriously. Because I don't know many problems in life that can be solved without even getting a basic understanding of the problem itself. No one gets a job that's difficult to get without even understanding the fundamentals of what are the skills involved, right? What kinds of companies have these types of jobs? What does it take, right? And if you really care about these shootings, whether it's mass shootings or just, gang-related shootings in Chicago, if you really care about these things and you really would like to see the violence stop, then you would have spent at least a basic amount of time to at least understand the very, very fundamentals of the issue. And it starts with the source. Where are these guns coming from? If you don't even know that, like that's the beginning of it, right? You can get to so many different levels of who these people are and why they choose to do what they do. But if you don't even understand where these guns are purchased or attained, like where do they come from, then I can't take your arguments very serious. I don't think you are a serious actor who really cares at all. And you're looking to me to be more of a reactionary that's just regurgitating some kind of narrative that's been fed to you. I haven't spent a ton of time researching this stuff, but all my research begins at the source, right? If people are doing bad things with certain items and you want to talk about how to stop them, wouldn't you want to know where they get them from? So if you are pro-gun and you're afraid of gun restrictions, but you actually care about these shootings and you would like to see something done about it, you'd like to not have another mass shooting, but maybe you just feel like the people who are anti-gun, maybe they're going about it the wrong way. But if you are genuinely serious, spend at least a minimal, basic amount of time to understand the problem, so you can even have a chance of coming up with a solution that perhaps you can suggest and promote to others, and do your part in keeping our children safe and others. If you're anti-gun and you want to see guns restricted, if you don't even know what AR-15 stands for, and you don't even understand why this gun is usually used, right? Perhaps spend some time to understand. Don't just listen to, again, the influencers you follow and let them tell you what to think. Think for yourself. What are these guns? Why are they being purchased? Why do we keep seeing them being used for these things? What would be the impact of banning this particular gun? Is that the right approach? If we ban the AR-15 style guns, is there another gun that is just as effective that would be used instead? Take some time to have some integrity, to research your positions, so you can actually understand what it is you're fighting for. Whether it is preserving the Second Amendment or it is curbing the results of the Second Amendment in terms of how guns are used, purchased, and idolized in America. This is Debate Me channel. Debate me in the comment section below. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell. Be well. This is your nonpartisan source of commentary like this. I welcome you if you're on the left, you're on the right. I don't really care about your politics. I would like us to, Unite. United we stand, divided we fall. I want Americans to stand together for a better America. Reject the tribes. Unplug. It's time for a media revolution.